My name is Arthur. I'm a librarian. Not an old gray-haired keeper of antiquities, but a young man who found refuge from a bustling and meaningless world in the silence and smell of old books. But my greatest enemy wasn't the hustle. My enemy was the night. I suffered from a chronic, debilitating insomnia. Night after night, I would lie awake with my eyes open, listening to the ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, as the world outside my window drifted into a sleep that was forbidden to me. Doctors were at a loss. Sleeping pills had no effect. I was desperate. And, as is often the case, I found the answer where I spent all my days, among the books. While sorting through decommissioned items in the medical archive, I stumbled upon a thin, unremarkable book in a worn binding. Hypnology of Atypical States, the title read. Inside, among boring scientific articles, I found something that made my heart stop. A chapter on a method for completely suppressing the need for sleep. This wasn't science. It was something on the border of alchemy and esotericism, a set of strange mental exercises, breathing techniques, and rituals to be performed during the dead hour, the time between 3 and 4 in the morning. The author claimed that sleep was not a physical necessity, but a habit of the consciousness, a program that could be hacked. I was so exhausted that I was ready to believe anything. That very night, I began. I sat in the middle of my quiet apartment and followed the instructions. It was difficult. The exercises required incredible concentration, but I was persistent. And it worked. On the third night, I felt something inside me click. The familiar heaviness in my eyelids vanished. The fog in my head cleared. I didn't want to sleep. I simply didn't need to. At first, it was exhilarating. I had acquired a gift that millions dream of. I had an extra 8 hours a day. At night, when the city fell silent, I discovered a new, quiet world. I read the books I'd never had time for during the day. I listened to music without any distractions. I walked the deserted streets, bathed in the orange glow of the streetlights. I felt like a Superman, a secret observer of the sleeping world. But about a week later, I began to notice the side effects. At first, they were small things. As I moved around my apartment, I started seeing quick, dark shadows in the corner of my eye, which would disappear at the moment I turned my head. I blamed it on fatigue, but how could I be tired if I wasn't sleeping? Then came the sound, a quiet, indecipherable whisper at the very edge of hearing. It sounded like the chirping of crickets or distant radio static, but sometimes, in that chaos, I thought I could make out words. I opened the book again, trying to find an explanation, and I found it. At the very end of the chapter, in a tiny, almost unreadable font, was a postscript. Sleep is a defense mechanism. Every night, it reboots your perception, erasing random visual and auditory noise. When you stop sleeping, the protective barrier thins. You begin to see reality as it truly is, with all its layers. Layers. That thought haunted me. The shadows became more frequent. They no longer vanished immediately. Sometimes I could glimpse their shape. Tall, unnaturally thin, with long, slender limbs. They didn't look human. They moved strangely, in jolts like frames in an old film. They existed in the same space as me, but at a different pace, in a different layer. and they didn't notice me at first. But the longer I went without sleep, the more real I must have become to them. One night, I was sitting alone in the library's reading room, and I saw one of the shadows at the far end of the hall stop. It slowly turned in my direction. I couldn't see any eyes, but I felt its gaze on me. Curious, predatory. From that moment on, everything changed. They had started to notice me. They began to show an interest. It began with little things. A book I had just placed on a shelf would fall to the floor at the moment I turned away. Doors I was sure I had closed would be ajar. The whispering grew louder. Now it sounded right next to my ear. I was terrified. I wanted to sleep. I took a handful of sleeping pills, but they had no effect. My body, my mind had forgotten how to sleep. I locked myself in my apartment, drew all the curtains, but it didn't help. I could see them. They passed through the walls, their dark, blurred silhouettes gliding through my room. They were everywhere. I realized the method from the book wasn't a cure. It was an initiation. I had crossed a line, and there was no way back. I no longer belonged to the world of the sleeping. The last night was the quietest. I sat in my apartment, drained by fear. They were here. I couldn't see them, but I felt their presence in every corner. And then, right in front of me, the air began to thicken. The shadow ceased to be a shadow. It took shape. It was a tall, pale, eyeless creature, woven from twilight and silence. It didn't look evil. It looked ancient, infinitely ancient. It didn't speak aloud. Its voice sounded directly in my head. It was cold as the void between stars. "Now you see," the voice said. "Now you are one of us." It extended its long, thin, smoky hand toward me. "Come," the voice said. "We will show you the rest." And I understood. I hadn't just stopped sleeping. I had slipped out of conventional reality. I had become just like them, an eternal, sleepless observer, a ghost trapped between the layers of a world teeming with nightmares invisible to others. I stood up, and I stepped forward to meet it.
My name is Paul. My life is other people's lives. I am an archivist. I work with private collections, sorting through boxes filled with old letters, photographs, and documents. I am the one who brings order to the chaos of other people's memories. It's a quiet, solitary job, and I've always liked it. I believed that truth was hidden in those yellowed papers. Now, I know that some truths are better left buried forever. The assignment was unusual. I was to catalog the personal archive of a recently deceased historian, Aristarch Gromov. Gromov was an eccentric, almost mythical figure. He lived as a recluse in a huge old mansion and was obsessed with the idea of a hidden history, the true motives and feelings behind official events. I was to work directly in his house, in a vast, damp basement that he called his archive. The archive was immense. Dozens of shelves, crammed with dusty boxes. I began my methodical work. Most of the documents were ordinary: church records, trade ledgers, personal correspondence. But one day, I came across a separate shelf, hidden behind a heavy curtain. On it were several boxes with a single inscription: corrected memories. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened the first box. Inside was a folder. In it, an old group photograph of a happy, smiling family, taken sometime in the early 20th century. But attached to the photo was a small, yellowed slip of paper, covered in Gromov's meticulous handwriting. It was a correction. The Orlov family, 1912. Official version, a model of family bliss. The truth, the head of the family, Ivan Orlov, hates his younger brother Arthur, who is standing on the right. He is smiling, but at this very moment, he is thinking about how to set his brother's stables on fire, which he will do in 2 weeks. His wife Anna knows this. Her smile is a mask of despair. I felt a slight unease. It felt like a malicious rumor, slander against people long dead. I put the folder aside and picked up another. It contained a wedding portrait, a beautiful young couple, and again, a note from Gromov. The Polonsky wedding, 1953. Official version, a marriage of love. The truth, the groom, Victor, is not looking at his bride, but at her sister, who is just out of frame. In a year, he will leave his young wife, abandoning her with a child and a broken heart. On the day this photograph was taken, she was truly happy, for the last time in her life. As I read those words, I felt it, a faint, almost imperceptible wave of cold sorrow that seemed to emanate from the photograph itself. I shook my head. It was just my imagination, spurred by the grim atmosphere of the basement. But it happened again. With each new correction, with each new secret revealed, I would feel a momentary flash of the emotion described in it. Pure, distilled hatred, deep, bottomless grief, animalistic fear. I realized that Gromov was not just a historian. He was something more. He had somehow learned to extract and preserve true, hidden feelings on paper, like butterflies on a pin. I wanted to stop. I wanted to go back to the boring trade ledgers, but I couldn't. These stories, these raw, unfiltered emotions drew me in. I became obsessed. I spent days and nights in the basement, sifting through the tragedies of others. And then I reached the last box. It was smaller than the rest. Inside, there was only one folder. When I opened it, my heart stopped. Staring back at me from the folder was my own face. It was a childhood photograph of me, one I didn't even know existed. I was about 5 years old in it. I was standing at our summer house, smiling a wide, toothless grin, hugging my mother. She was smiling too, looking directly at the camera. It was a warm, happy memory that I seemed to have forgotten. I didn't understand. How did Gromov have this photograph? What connection did he have to my family? With trembling hands, I reached for the attached slip of paper, for the correction. I unfolded it. Gromov's handwriting was as even and dispassionate as ever. Paul, 1985. Official version? A happy child with his loving mother. The truth. He is smiling, but he doesn't know. He doesn't know that his real mother died in childbirth a year ago. And this is not her. This is something that took her place. It looks like her, talks like her, smells like her, but it is cold inside. It has no soul. And sometimes, when he sleeps, it leans over his crib and whispers to him, very, very quietly, in a language that does not exist. I dropped the photograph. The air in the basement turned to ice. Fragments of forgotten childhood nightmares began to surface in my mind, like shards of broken glass. The feeling of coldness from my mother's hands, the quiet, incomprehensible whispering at night that I had always mistaken for the creaking of the old house. Her strange, empty eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. And in that moment, I heard quiet, painfully familiar footsteps behind me. And then, a voice. The same gentle, loving voice I had adored all my childhood. "Paul, what are you doing sitting here in the dark? Come upstairs. I've made your favorite pie." I didn't want to turn around. I knew that if I did, I would see her. And I would see in her eyes the emptiness that Gromov had written about. I would know that my entire life was built on a lie, and I would no longer be able to pretend that I didn't know. She took another step. I could hear her breathing just behind my back. "Come now, dear. Mother is waiting." And slowly, very slowly, I began to turn my head. I'm a geologist, or at least I was. My life consisted of silence and stones. I would spend months on solo expeditions, far from people, mapping the white spots of our planet. I always considered silence my ally. It allowed me to hear the earth breathe, the creak of a glacier, the whisper of wind in the rocks, the hum of subterranean voids. I thought I understood the language of silence, but I was wrong. That year, in a nameless ridge of the Tian Shan Mountains, I learned that silence too has its predators. The ridge where I went was an anomaly, a pristine, untouched corner of the world that for some reason both shepherds and mountaineers avoided. My task was to create the first detailed map of its gorges and glaciers. My only connection to the world was an old, reliable radio tuned to the frequency of a base camp 100 kilometers away. On the very first day, I set up camp in a wide, perfectly quiet valley, surrounded by sheer cliffs that looked like giant, broken teeth. The air was so pure and still that I felt I could hear my own heartbeat. To test the acoustics, I did what I always did in such places. I took a deep breath and shouted a simple, "Hey!" The sound of my voice hit the cliffs and came back to me. But something was wrong. The echo was distorted. It was lower, rougher, and had a hostility to it that wasn't in my own voice. I shouted again, this time a long, drawn-out, "Ah!" The echo returned as a roaring, beast-like growl. I chalked it up to an unusual geological formation, to the interference of sound waves. But an unpleasant, cold feeling settled inside me. The next day, I began my work. I moved through the valley, striking the rock with my geological hammer, taking measurements. And every sound I made returned to me, altered. The sharp crack of the hammer on stone came back as a dull, heavy thud, as if someone were beating a giant drum. The clang of a dropped carabiner, as a funereal tolling of a bell. I felt as if the valley itself was mocking me, ridiculing me. By evening, I decided to maintain complete silence. I tried to move without a sound, not making a peep. But the silence brought no peace, because the mountains had already memorized my sounds. That night, sitting by my dying fire, I began to hear them. From the darkness of the gorge came the sound of my hammer. Then the clang of the carabiner, And then, the distorted, snarling roar that had once been my voice. The mountains weren't just reflecting sound. They were recording it, collecting it, and playing it back whenever they pleased. They were creating a symphony of my presence. I spent several days in this acoustic hell. By day, I worked in silence, and by night, I listened as the mountains tormented me with the sounds of my own existence. I started to lose my mind. It began to seem that there was a system in this sonic chaos, that the echo wasn't just repeating, but the climax came on the 5th day. The sky turned black in minutes. A thunderstorm of a severity I had never seen in the mountains began. The wind howled, rain lashed down, and lightning struck the cliffs so frequently that the night became a strobe light. One of the bolts hit the cliff right above my camp. There was a deafening crack, and I saw a huge section of the rock face break away and come crashing down, blocking the only exit from the valley. I was trapped. My only hope was the radio, but I stared at it with horror. I knew what would happen as soon as I pressed the button and spoke my plea for help into the microphone. The mountains would hear it. They would memorize my fear, my desperation, and they would repeat it to me for eternity, even if I was never found. The thought of my cry for help becoming a permanent exhibit in this diabolical collection. 2 days passed. My food was running out. The storm had subsided, but the rockfall was too massive to clear. I sat, staring at the radio, at war with myself. Hunger and cold were taking their toll. In the end, the instinct for self-preservation won. I decided that eternal torment was better than a quick death. With a trembling hand, I picked up the radio, pressed the button, and gathering my last strength, shouted into the microphone. "Base, this is number 1. I'm trapped. I need help. I repeat, I need help." I released the button and waited. I expected to hear nothing but static in return, and maybe a distorted echo of my own cry. But what I heard made my blood run cold. A completely clear, calm voice came from the speaker, without a hint of static. It was not the voice of the operator from the base. It was that same low, hostile voice I had heard on the first day. The voice of the mountains themselves. And it said, "We hear you. We are already here." I looked up in terror. The valley was shrouded in a thick fog. And in that fog, on the slopes of the cliffs all around me, I saw movement. Dozens of tall, dark shadows. They weren't walking. They were just standing and watching me. And then I understood everything. The radio had never worked. The signal could never have penetrated these cliffs. All this time, I hadn't been talking to the outside world. I had been talking to the mountains. The echo hadn't just been repeating and distorting. It had been learning. Day after day, it listened to my voice, my intonations, forming words from sounds, phrases from words. It was learning to speak. And now, it had learned. Learned well enough to answer me, to lure me into its final trap. The shadows in the fog took their first slow step down into the valley toward me. And from the gorge, from all sides, the echo crashed down on me. It was my own voice, twisted beyond recognition, repeating over and over, like a mantra of madness. 2 words: need help, need help.